Hey everyone. So to finally wrap up High Seas week 1, I wanted to put out a Puffin list. Oddly enough, she felt like a very difficult hero to brew because this is the first time that LSS has kind of given us permission as a mech class to not engage with the boost cards. Her hero power is not really tied to boosting, and the cards that they gave us in the set don't really use the keyword or care about it. And while I did that, I did encounter a few problems. The first one is that all of the previous power cards in the class are all centered around boost. You think about something like Bios Update, Pulse Wave Harpoon, Heist, even something like Twin Drive and Max Velocity. I mean, these are all very explosive cards to the class, but they all care about boost. So it's not like any other classes where you put in a bunch of good Majestics, but then you also get to play your in-class power cards as well, because the in-class power cards for Puffin don't really work. So initial lists I had were playing things like CNC, Conqueror of the High Seas, Sync, Fate, the whole list, right? And we're playing generic pile good stuff while cranking sometimes and doing a little bit of the cog interaction. The main problem was it didn't really feel like it was actually doing anything broken. It just felt like it was playing fair cards with a kind of clunky backup thing that was happening. There was some setup involved, but it didn't really feel like it actually was like capitalizing on any actual mechanics of the deck. It just really felt like it was stumbling its way into victories. This list today feels a lot more concrete, and it feels like it actually is like pushing a very particular game strategy and a overall macro plan. But it unfortunately comes to the downside of being like every other mechanologist deck that we've played. But there are a lot of new flavors added from the set, so I don't think it'll feel like you're playing, like OG dash boost with Tekla Pounder. There's a lot more interaction that happens with the cogs, but we are back in the good old classic 60 mech cards in the main board strategy. So to run it top to bottom, let's start with the hero, of course. Whenever we have a gold, we're able to crack it, make a golden cog. This is just something that taps and cranks, and when we crank twice in a turn, we draw a card. That part of the hero text, I think, is what initially set off some alarm bells for people during spoiler season. It felt like a very powerful effect. It didn't really feel like a lot of lists, my early ones included, were really capitalizing on that nature of it. So today we've dialed it up to 11. We're definitely going to be trying to activate the hero every single turn, specifically the second half the text to draw. Our equipment suite is kind of smoothing out a lot about the hero. So the most obvious one is going to be the arm piece. This just lets us on demand decide when we want a golden cog. This could just be that we're short on cogs for a turn, or we have 0 to begin with and we need them to actually execute a game plan. Sad to say that Crown of Dominion actually feels pretty powerful in the deck. I'm saying this because I don't own a copy, and I just looked on TCG Player this morning and they are like 130 USD. So who knows if I'll ever even own one, but it feels very strong, right? Because this, in combination with the arm piece and Polycrank, it lets you decide when you want to have your pivot turn. The biggest thing is that with Puffin, Crown lets you make a cog whenever you want, and then Poly cranks itself into the arena whenever you want. So at any point during the game with no setup, you can decide that you want to draw a new card that turn. You want to crank twice, which is very powerful for the deck. Not only putting a cog on the field, but also drawing a card and putting the ally that your opponent has to interact with. If they don't clear Poly, you'll get to crank again on the following turn and draw a new card. So it just immediately puts the onus on your opponent to make the correct game read while also you getting a power spike, and this can happen as early as turn 2. Spitfire curves out really well with the deck. A lot of our deck curves out very cleanly, and also usually leaves you with an action point, specifically the boost package. Spitfire just means that you have a 0 for 3 or a 0 for 2 chain ender almost every single turn. This feels very similar to Symbiosis Shot in Dio, where you just have incidental chip damage at the end of every single turn that eventually catches up to your opponent in terms of overall turn cycle math. Foundry Heart is a block 3, and we are playing boost, so we are able to actually capitalize on the one resource. If you wanted to lean into Tunic, I think that would also be viable as well. And then finally, Unicycle blocks 1 and lets us cheat an extra cog tap in a single turn. This is really important if, for instance, you want to play something like Aeronaut where you need 3 cogs, but you only have 2. You can just tap the 2 cogs, use Unicycle, untap the cog, retap it to get the 3 cog activation trigger. And then going into the deck, I'll start by kicking it off with the absolutely psychotic number of blue copper cogs. I do think that this card is actually really good, and when you play this in a turn and then activate Puffin, you immediately refund the card. Getting that double crank super easily, I think is actually really important, as well as making cogs. So almost every single one of these just like says like play it, draw a card. While they obviously don't stack, so you can't just do something absolutely degenerate, I do think that having a high density is actually pretty important because you need to see these pretty often. So I'm playing 12 for now. Time will tell what the actual correct number is. I could even see the number going higher, but most likely lower on these. But just whenever you draw them, they really feel like they just kind of hold the deck together, and every single turn you're happy to have one in your hand, I felt like so far. Just refunding them the card, I think is just good enough. And then you also just are able to just tap more cogs in a turn, which is really important for the deck. So I just want to get that out of the way, but let's kind of break it down. So we'll start with the glue pieces, and then we'll go into the aggro and then the payoff cards. Overall, glue, or like the engine building of the deck, is going to be cards like Cog in the Machine. These just make cogs, and you have the ability to recur it if you want. You have Cogworks Workshop, once again makes cogs and helps you keep them around for extra turns. And then you have Sky Warden. This just lets you block galvanized cogs that are going to die, and then keep extra gold on your follow-up turns, so that way you can keep it going. In terms of aggro cards, like I said, we are playing boost, so we do have a lot of good boost options. We have 0 to 60 and Zipper Hit. These are just really good, efficient attacks. They put a lot of pressure on your opponent. You have Sky Skimmer. This is more often than not going to be a 0 for 4th go again, tapping a cog while you play out the rest of your hand. And then Soup Up is also 0 for 4 whenever start of your turn a cog breaks. And it also doubles as a block 4 on defense, which can actually be very clutch in certain matchups. For more aggro, we also have Fast and Furious. This is just extra copies of 0 to 60, but with actual upside, because if you ever boost these off the top, you're able to actually keep an extra counter on one of your cogs. And then Heist is a really good boost card, because with the absolutely insane number of blue copper cogs that we're playing, whenever this hits, it threatens to not only net you an action point, since you'll be able to crank the cog in immediately, but also can potentially draw you a card off Puffin as well. So I feel like this card kind of glues everything together in terms of it probably being the most premier like aggro boost card of the package. And then finally, we have all of our payoffs for all the cogs that we're playing, right? So we'll just start with blue Hyper Scrapper and work our way up to the more powerful ones. Hyper Scrapper, I just wanted to include as a slow to fatigue matchup style card. This was very popular in Dash.io as a good end game. You have all these items in the grave, especially with all the copper cogs, and so in the end game you're able to send huge amounts of damage on your blues before following up with more powerful attacks. And it should be enough to kind of close out like any deck that was either playing a long game with you or actually trying to fatigue you out. More cog payoffs are going to include really powerful cards like Dovetail. I think Dovetail is probably one of the best cards that I would prefer to draw every single turn, because it's really flexible no matter the amount of cogs that you have. So if you only have one cog, this is still 1 for 5 go again, and when it hits, you untap the cog, and then you get to send Spitfire after for 2, since the cog will be untapped for the Spitfire. So I think this card is really powerful, right? Like you can make this a lot of times like a 1 for 7 on hit, extra +2 or +3, right? Because even with the unicycle, you can just have 2 cogs out, tap the 2 cogs, give it +2, use unicycle, untap a cog, retap it to give the Dovetail go again. And then when it hits, because your opponent has to commit to however much they're blocking, I mean, you can do this in the reaction step as the opponent. You could save a D-react, but it makes blocking very difficult. If this thing hits, you untap the 3 cogs. You could play another Dovetail and do this all over again. Or you could just send the Spitfire and tap it for 3 extra damage. So when you do the math that way, this card is like a really crazy on hit. And that goes the same for Zeppelin, which I think is probably the best, I would say, one of the best cards in the deck, honestly. This basically just does the same thing where when it hits, you're able to just tap a cog and make a new one. But the really important thing is that when you make the new cog, you can crank it, which will give you your action point back at the very least. And it's an untapped cog. So when it hits, you can get your action point back and then send the Spitfire for 2 with the untapped cog. But what's way more important is that making a new cog can also trigger Puffin. So sometimes this will just say like on hit, draw a card, send your pistol for 2 or 3. Right, which when you break down the math that way, these cards get absolutely nuts. I mean, you can say that this is like anywhere from like a 2 for a 6 to maybe like a 2 for a 12, right? Because maybe you're sending 9 with the +3 on the cogs, and then when it hits, you're going to send an extra 3 with the Spitfire, right? So, I mean, it does kind of get a little bit nuts. And then if you add a card draw in there, you can come up with a lot of theoretical numbers, but like the baseline is that I think this card is like absolutely nuts, and so that's why we're running the rainbow. And then our final payoff for all the cogs is going to be Aeronaut. Aeronaut just is very powerful for what it does, right? Like it just destroys equipment, and that's very strong in certain matchups. The biggest thing is that if your opponent ever wants to try to game you on it and put a blade break equipment in front of it, right, then you can just opt to destroy another defending card on the chain as well. So for instance, if they were, blocking with a 3-block and maybe a blade break equipment they assumed you were going to destroy anyway, you can just opt not to kill the blade break equipment because it'll die anyway and just take out their 3-block, and then you essentially give this an extra +3. The other thing too is that if you've been boosting this whole turn and you haven't closed the chain, you have the opportunity to destroy a defending card on a previous chain link. So if they ever put equipment or something on a previous chain link and then you end your turn with Aeronaut, you could just destroy 2 things with one go, right? If they also are forced to block with another equipment. This will be really important because we're also going to include T-Bone in the sideboard as well. When we go down to our sideboard, I'm just trying to cover a wide array of matchups until we figure out what the meta is, and then we can tunnel vision a little bit more. So against fatigue matchups, we have Backup Protocol Red. This lets us recur some of our power cards in the end game. We have Boom Grenade for aggro matchups. This lets us just threaten a bunch of damage very quickly and present on hits. We have T-Bone against decks that really care about certain equipment pieces to function properly. So you would think about something like Verdance needing both Striders and Plume. Being able to destroy equipments against certain decks is very important. A lot of their game plans revolve around the equipment. So if you're able to snipe them very early, you can make the matchup a lot easier. And then we have Jolly Bludger, both as the spoiler card of the channel and as a card that you can play into basically every single pirate hero, either stealing rum or gold from them. And then also in the mirror, it's absolutely insane, or into any mechanologist in general. I think time will tell if you actually need to play this card or not. If the high seas heroes end up not being very popular, either due to card accessibility or maybe power level, or just how people feel about them, then this card is not very impactful. But we're running 3 until further notice. We have AB3 of Achilles and Visitronic. And then in a decks that are going to play like really tall dominated effects, so think about something like Bravo or Azalea, you can play Adaptive Plating in place of your leg slot and just get an extra +3 block. In terms of cards to consider, I threw these down here. There's lots of other things to include as well. I mean, this could be a very, very long list, but just things I'm currently thinking about as of like today. Crown of Providence, if you either are like me and don't own Crown of Dominion and are trying to figure out what to do, or if you are worried about either Arsenal Disruption having less blocking equipment, or are worried about the concentration of non-blocks in the deck, specifically the Copper Cogs, you could play something like Providence to get more filter. BIOS Update is really powerful because if you're boosting Copper Cogs off the top of the deck frequently, not only are you cheating action points and cheating a card draw essentially because you just cheat a card you would normally have to resolve from hand anyway, but you're netting action points, drawing cards. I mean, it does really everything you want. It's a front pump as well. The main issue is that while we are playing boost cards, I don't think we're playing enough that you're always going to BIOS update online, right? You want multiple boosts in a single turn for this to actually get payoff. So I actually don't really think you're going to get the full text out of this unless if you really increase the number of boost cards in the deck. The throttle could be more powerful than heist depending on the meta, if you need poppers or if the one actual physical damage ends up being more relevant than the threat of the on hit. So like in blocking metas, I would rather play throttle because if they're going to block heist anyway, then I would just rather send 6 instead of 5. A null time zone for really niche decks that have very specific cards, swing cons. Think about like Wildfire against Kano, and do defensive matchups where you can name like a D-React like Rootbound Carapace, but until further notice, I don't think I need to play it in the actual list. And then Pinion Sentry is a really powerful card. For those who don't know, whenever you make a Copper Cog on defense, you're able to actually still crank it. So if you crank twice, you can draw during your opponent's turn. So if your opponent attacked you and you blocked the Sentry and also blocked with the Tinker Rings, you could even stack the triggers so that you're able to do both and essentially draw a card on your opponent's turn, double cranking, and then during your turn, do it again and draw another card. The main problem is that because we crank a lot and this is a very aggro-oriented list, you don't want any possible whiffs. Time will tell. This maybe board will also change and the list will probably change as well. But I wanted to get this out there, at least before Nats, if anyone needed last minute ideas if you're going to register this hero or just wants to know what cards to pick up. So you can start looking at this and then make a decision. But hopefully this just informs you a little bit more. Until next time, thank you for watching.